All right, thank you guys. So today I just want to share a little bit about what we are doing in the 5D and 4D space. Basically just leveraging the humble 3D design model. And I want to take you through a little bit of a journey that we've been on over the last couple of years, working over in Malaysia on the KVMRT. So a bit of a case study just to demonstrate, I guess, an implementation journey that we've done to put it all in perspective for you. Now, to, I guess, set a bit of the scene, it's pretty sad when you sit there and think about some of the things that we've just had to deal with in the industry for a very long time. Now, for myself as a quantity surveyor, I deal a lot with cost. I also deal a fair amount with time as well. The two things go hand in hand. And, the way that we, I guess, have been constrained in managing two of the most fundamental success factors of a project has been very limited. But technology now is really starting to break down those barriers. We don't need to use these rule of thumb approaches anymore. So, when we're looking at cost, we've got rule of thumb contingencies. We use standard S-curves in a lot of cases for when we're looking at program. Now, my rule of thumb to all of that is generally it's not going to align. You've got to be pretty fortunate to have your project align with that. So it's true that traditional barriers now are today's opportunity. And that's the way we need to look at these things with technology and how rapidly technology is actually advancing. So from a 5D and 4D point of view, how is this changing things? Well, for us, and I'm going to make this statement, that all good design models have good data in them. And it's a pretty easy equation to work out. A good model has good data. A great model has great data, and a shit model has pretty good information in it still. So you've just got to know how to use it, and you've got to know where to look and keep digging. But basically for us, it's all about quantity. Now, quantity leads both time and cost outcomes. So, we're in a pretty good position as QSs to be able to manage and link quantities back through to models, which then opens up, I guess, a new way that we can start to understand and actively manage that information. And when you start to tie time and cost to that, then you're really starting to open up things like virtual cash flow that we've never been able to do before.
It's an infrastructure project that
can you kill the sound on all this, please?
Connecting
So I'm just going to take you through a bit of a journey that we're on for the KVMRT in Malaysia. So we're working with Gamuda, the head contractor of that, and basically a role of implementation and also doing some of the doing. So it's a pretty good journey and an exciting job to be part of. I guess applying a lot of what we've been doing for a very long time to something of such a massive scale. So to be able to then utilise some of the maps that we might write and overlay that against multiple stations. We're involved in the underground station component. It was just, a mind-blowing kind of experience. So 50-odd kilometres in total. There's about 35 stations. As I said, the 11 underground stations are what we were involved in and with the underground team. And it's got a pretty big price tag on that project, which I think is under a bit of scrutiny at the moment. So our role was not only to deliver 5D and 4D, but also to implement. And the biggest part of it was they wanted to advance their BIM goals and basically leverage a lot of the existing technology that they had. So they didn't want to start from scratch. In actual fact, they couldn't start from scratch because they were halfway through their design. So this is literally something that we needed to get in and we needed to start running, and we needed to train and inspire people so that they could run as well. So it was basically a parallel approach with the way they were traditionally doing things and then trying to leverage some of the technology that was there, plus implement new technology and then go through that whole training process. So it was quite an ambitious task, but the outcome was definitely quite successful and very worthwhile. So we broke our roll up into a few phases, and the most important part of that journey was the discovery phase. And it was literally setting time with every single department, and there were big teams in there. The underground team, I think, had about 400 people in it. So we were dealing with 100 plus QSs. There was about half of that again in planners, which also had QSs. And basically understanding what the information flows currently were, where their pain points were, how they would traditionally go and do things, when things were getting checked, reviewed, implemented, and the like. So that I guess painted a very good picture for us. And what we quickly discovered, it was a very, very traditional approach. Now, that company itself had come off the back of the first line, because it was line 2 that we're involved in. And they basically just took everything that they learned from line 1 and their approach to that to line 2. And they started to play around a little bit with model information and implemented a Revit team of 5 people. So this was basically a team that had a lot of smarts in it but was parked to one side. And that's really what we wanted to energise and leverage from. But the biggest thing for them is the amount of information. So we were literally having meetings with teams, and they would come to that meeting just with piles of A3 documents. And they were the documents that they were reviewing to then send back through to the main design consultants to make their changes. And that endless cycle would just continue to go round. So they could never actually keep on top of the information. No one was really working to the latest information, and it was all sort of just in time and whoever was screaming the loudest. So that was definitely the biggest opportunity that we could start to break down. So for us, it was about just writing things that we've been doing day in, day out here in Australia, and tailoring that to suit their environment and the technology. So we were doing things, 5D takeoff, that was the low-hanging fruit. Huge efficiencies were gained out of all of that to move on through to revisioning. Model validation side, obviously a critical component. And then we started to apply the program information to all of that data so that we could start to look at cash flow, sequencing and scheduling to help manage those projects on site. Here's that famous workflow, or a similar one. So this is frustrating for me because there are a lot of steps in this, but it's as good as we've got at the moment. There's an opportunity for this to be a one-stop shop, but it still needs that flexibility. And you can see our friend Excel pops up a few times there, so thank God for Excel. But this was the workflow that we designed. As I said before, it was utilising what they currently had, which was Revit, Excel, Primavera, and they're also running some Navisworks. And the rest is what we implemented and had to train. So the end result is what we're looking for in this. Basically a 5D and 4D sequence. I'm sure you've all seen these in the past. The difference is we've got the dollars that are ticking over at the top. I think I'll just stop that. But really that's the cartoon. That's the output. It's the data that sits behind that. We've got obviously 5D information that's linking to that. We've got revisionable quantities. Then we've got program data assigned to it too, so that we can start to understand and start to note down some of the milestones so that we can look at status and we can better manage progress claims. Because again, this was 11 underground stations, huge stations. These things are about 150 metres long. And when you're dealing with these all over a city, it's a complex web. You've got so many bits of information coming in, dealing with so many different subcontractors at different points in time. This was really the only way that they could start to quickly understand cost of work, value of work complete in a certain way. Rather than, again, those rule of thumb percentage-based approaches, which we try and move away from. So a big part of the role was training. So we trained close to 100 people, basically through just understanding digital data. These guys had never seen a 3D model of their project. They were dealing with 2D information. But there was 3D models being produced at tender time, and it's just the information just wasn't shared. It wasn't treated as valuable information. So we went through all digital data, what to expect, what to understand, how to validate. The 5D quantity takeoff is the foundation for being able to enable all of this. then looking at the scheduling side of it, and again the programmers, for them to be able to create these schedules with the diaphragm walls, that all they'd done in the past is seen that in 2D, and the look on their face, it was all really worth it. It was pretty exciting for them particularly. So, and then beyond that, then we're starting to look at, as I said, virtual cash flow and then progress and status. So today, or where we left them, this is what they were operating in. They had shifted over from 2D into a 3D environment, then embraced Costex. So Costex was the platform for the takeoff, a very visual tool for them. You can see how excited they are, but they actually were that excited to be able to see this information. Now, you look at the efficiencies on this type of stuff. If they were doing a takeoff of a package, a typical package, even if it was a straightforward one like concrete, they would literally have a team of 5 or 10 people, and they would be measuring away manually, some on-screen takeoff with PDFs, but they were taking weeks and weeks and weeks, sometimes months. We could go in there and literally do the takeoff they were doing in a day. And then in that day, we could apply that same map to the other 10 stations and get the same outcome in a day. That would have taken them months and months and months. So to be able to, I guess, break down that initial barrier of just the delay in getting access to a position of that project was a fundamental shift for the way that they could understand, progress and managing it going forward. And let alone just the knowledge transfer on that as well, from a visual point of view. So this also opened up their need for a CDE, which was mentioned before, a Bentley product. So trying to house all of that project information in one place and give access to as many people to that digital information and the latest information as possible. Integration with GIS as well. Quite important for a project like this that is a linear type project and across quite a vast location. And the one thing I don't think I did mention before is that they were very fortunate in being able to deliver all of this quickly because there were actually 3D models around. So AECOM were the main consultants on this, and they were producing good 3D models that we're able to leverage off. There was no BIM execution plan. This is not a BIM project. It was just a modelled project that we're able to leverage. And then they started to push that even further with getting, I guess, more of an understanding. So this was integrating with existing networks. There's another MRT and an LRT system in there. So to be able to understand what the existing conditions are, to be able to work around that and also enhance the verification side was pretty exciting for them as well. So from that platform, that initial platform, they're really able to rapidly implement other technologies around this. They had drones flying around as well, the photogrammetry side of it, and they're really just starting to get some good momentum in how they can leverage this digital information. And going from literally 2 years ago, a basis of not having any 3D information available to any of their teams to it all being opened up, and then playing and having conversations around this type of 3D data was really exciting for them and for us. So it didn't come without its challenges. Look, the main one was obviously it was a live environment, so everything still had to move. So everything that we were doing, we were either doing in parallel, or we had to take the punt and stop what was going to be happening traditionally, and then we'd bring about a new way of doing it. And this was all about people bringing in what they'd learnt through the training and literally throwing them in the deep end and teaching them how to swim pretty fast. Their hardware adequacy, so we had a Gamuda training academy that we're working within, that we were heading up the 5D and 4D side of. So brand new machines, new facility, it was really nice. They went back to their desks and they had these really old laptops that I think we must have sent from Australia 10 years ago. And literally with a screen this size, you could hardly move in the workspace, so you couldn't even collaborate next to one another. So those simple things that we take for granted have all started to change now, and it was a need. The access to old tools, now they were still there. So the guys that and girls that didn't really want to change fast or were a bit more confident in the way that they used to do things, unfortunately they still had access to those tools. So there were a few people that were rolling back in and doing things the old way, particularly after we left. Culturally, we needed to consider that because it was very much a top-down approach. There was a want and a desire from up here, but it kept getting pushed down to the next person, and the responsibility chain was very similar to that. Eating frogs and durian was a bit of a challenge over in Malaysia. The frogs are much better than the durian, just FYI if you go over there. And then the usual change barriers as well. And this was one thing that we were trying to encourage them to adopt, is a very clear change management process. And it's something, as I said, from maybe a cultural point of view, didn't happen. It was just a driven outcome. And whilst it worked in a clunky way, I think ultimately for that business, they really need to go through a very considered change management process. And anything like this type of change, it's a significant change. And whilst a lot of people are excited about it, there's also a lot of people, a lot of skilled people that need some guidance, and they need to be led through such a significant shift. And the other opportunities they had, services they started to embark on, but things like reinforcement. They were measuring reinforcement manually. So that equation I worked out before about how long it takes people just to do, say, a concrete structure, you can times that by 2 in the time it takes them to do the reinforcement. Now, to put it in perspective, we found some models that had reinforcement, probably not right, but there's, say, 1,500 tonnes of reinforcement that can be quantified in under 10 minutes. So quite powerful stuff if you go to the effort of modelling this information, which I believe you should, because if it's modelled, then it can be managed. So my final words, the future is here. It's time to look at those traditional barriers and look at them as opportunities now. You can create a lot of trust by utilising 3D information. If it's modelled, you can manage it more proactively. And if you don't know how to leverage a model, then find someone who does. Thank you.